Good evening, Chicago. I'm Andy Zopp, along with special guest host Dr. Suzet McKinney, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0.
Sufyan, Sohel, and Hugo Balta joined Andy at the roundtable to discuss the latest news, including a challenge to Toni Preckwinkle, the escalating friction between the mayor and city council over the 2026 budget, the departure of Northwestern's president, and the declining student enrollment at CPS.
Suzet sits one-on-one with Illinois EDC President and CEO Christy George to learn more about her organization's efforts to bring jobs, investment, and economic prosperity to our state.
Andy discusses the shifting tides in local politics with political analyst Kimberly Egoin.
And Suzet sits in conversation with leading executive coach Guy Summers to discuss emotional intelligence, what it actually is, and why it's so important in today's work environment.
We've curated an incredible hour of hyper-local news and information that directly impacts the lives of Chicagoans.
And it all starts right now.
Illinois is often called the crossroads of America, a hub for talent, transportation, and innovation. But in an era of fierce competition among states for jobs, investment, and opportunity, how does Illinois position itself to win? That's the mission of the Illinois Economic Development Corporation, formerly known as Intersect Illinois. The organization works to attract businesses, support expansion, and showcase Illinois as a place where companies and communities can thrive. Leading that effort is Christy George, the president and CEO of the Illinois Economic Development Corporation. With a background in both public service and economic development, she's focused on building partnerships, promoting Illinois' strengths, and ensuring that our state is not just in the game, but ahead of the curve. Christy, welcome to the newsroom.
Thank you so much, Suzette. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, let's jump right in. So the Illinois EDC's mission is to attract investment and create jobs. How do you describe the state's biggest competitive strengths when talking to potential companies that are considering Illinois?
There are so many competitive strengths about Illinois. You could start from several of the things that you mentioned just in your introduction, but we are the transportation hub of America. We have such strong assets and infrastructure, whether it's our railroads. We're the only state where all 6 Class 1 rails meet in 2 different locations in the Chicago area and then down near the Metro East. We have our crowning jewel of O'Hare Airport, where so much connectivity happens just there at O'Hare. Businesses can get anywhere within the North American market within 4 hours, which is incredible. We have an incredibly strong interstate system, 3rd largest in the nation here in the state, and you can get really anywhere within about a 2 to 3 day truck drive within the United States. So that is a huge asset to the state. Beyond that, we have the strength of our clean energy. We have the largest nuclear fleet in the nation. We have an incredibly reliable grid, which helps us compete for large capital-intensive projects. And probably the biggest asset that we have is our workforce. Our workforce is 6.5 million people strong. It's incredibly highly trained. More than half of them have a bachelor's degree or higher, and that really gives us a competitive edge when we're looking to compete for highly technologically advanced projects.
Absolutely. Well, we've seen major companies relocate to and expand to other states in recent years. What is Illinois doing to keep businesses here, but also to attract new businesses to come?
We are constantly innovating. One thing I would do is give a hats off to our Team Illinois partner, the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, led by Director Kristen Richards. Every year for the last 5 years, they've been able to develop a new business development omnibus package to the General Assembly. And leading from the governor in partnership with the General Assembly, principally led by Senate President Don Harmon and Speaker Chris Welch, the General Assembly has provided us with significant tools. They've looked at our existing business incentives. They've tweaked them constantly every year to make sure that they are competitive. And they've granted the Department of Commerce new incentives, whether that's the Invest in Illinois Fund or what we just saw in the last legislative session, which is a new tax credit specifically for advanced manufacturers. It was through that partnership that we were able to fund projects like the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park that's on the south side. That's really setting Chicago and Illinois in a much more competitive space, and we are seeing so much more momentum because of it.
That's fantastic. We're going to dive a little bit more into incentives later. But before we do that, what industries are you most focused on growing right now? And specifically, are there particular sectors like clean energy or life sciences, tech, or even advanced manufacturing where you think Illinois has an edge over a few other states?
Absolutely. And I know you've got an edge on the life sciences, so you know very well.
That's my space.
Exactly. You know very well just all of the competitive advantages we have in that space, especially with pharma giants like Abbott and AbbVie, all located here. And so that's definitely an industry that we're focused on recruiting more businesses and ensuring that our existing businesses that are here feel the love and that they grow and expand. Other industries that we have focused on are laid out in our 5-year economic development plan that was led by the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Those are industries that are legacy to our state, like advanced manufacturing. One of the key reasons why we created and why the General Assembly created that advanced manufacturing tax credit. In addition to that, we spent a lot of time focusing on clean energy production and manufacturing. It's an area where we have particular leadership, not only because of our nuclear fleet, but because in 2021, the governor, in partnership with the General Assembly, passed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And that focused really on the proliferation of solar and wind technology all throughout the state. And so we have seen a lot of projects focused on that, and we've seen that certainly being a growing industry within our state. We're spending a lot of time focusing on that. In addition to that, another industry that's legacy to our state and makes the most sense in the world to grow here is transportation, distribution, and logistics. I'm sure you're seeing warehouses pop up everywhere. We have a lot of that here in our state, and it's helpful, it's good for jobs, it's good for our economy. And then one area and industry that I just mentioned is quantum computing, and particularly the adjacent industries like AI and microelectronics we're also seeing growing in the state. I think the state made very clear last year that they were going to make a big bet on quantum.
Absolutely.
We saw that with the location of the Quantum and Microelectronics Park. We saw certainly just in December, we announced the National Quantum Algorithm Center with IBM as an anchor tenant. And then certainly for the IQMP, we announced PsiQuantum as being an anchor tenant as well. And so with all of that momentum, we are certainly seeing a lot of engagement and excitement around a variety of different industries, but I would say that those are some good examples.
Very exciting examples. So we've mentioned workforce, and employers are always talking about the need for skilled talent, but talk to us a little bit more about what Illinois is doing as a state to prepare the workforce, whether that's through higher education, training, or apprenticeships, really to meet the demands of the future economy.
It is a huge priority for the governor, a huge priority for the state. Illinois already has incredible assets with our higher education institutions. We have over 240 in the state. We have some of the top universities in the state. We have University of Chicago, Northwestern, University of Illinois. You talk about talent, just out of the University of Illinois alone, we graduate more engineers than MIT, Stanford, and Caltech combined.
That's
every
incredible.
single year. And that puts us at an incredible competitive edge. What the state is focused on doing is ensuring that they're investing not only from the 4-year universities, but it's within the community colleges. It's also within pre-K all the way through 12th grade. So we're seeing strategic investments from the General Assembly, from the governor, to ensure that we're training the workforce of the future. A couple of key areas where we've seen particular success has been specifically in the clean energy space. The governor, in partnership partnership with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, funded advanced manufacturing training academies, and they did that in partnership with certain employers. Sure. So what we've seen, particularly downstate, is a partnership to help create the talent needed for Rivian. We have also a partnership with TCCI that is funded. They actually received our first Reimagining Energy and Vehicles tax credit. But those are just examples of partnerships that are being done. There's other things that the state does to fund workforce training. They provide apprenticeship tax credits. They provide all sorts of different grants and employer training grants to ensure that the workforce of the future is available and that we're attracting employers, because that's really the number one issue that we're seeing across so many different companies that we talk to. It always comes down to workforce.
I'm really glad that you mentioned some of the work that's being done downstate, because another question that I have for you is, what is the Illinois EDC doing to ensure that these resources are available to downstate and rural communities as much as they're available here in the city?
Absolutely. I spend a lot of my time downstate. I will be in Edwardsville on Thursday. I think it's really important that we have a presence downstate and that we are not just a Chicago operation.
Absolutely.
So we definitely engage with higher education institutions downstate. We engage with EDO partners. We actually just had a call today with about 60 different EDOs that are all throughout the state. And the point of that is to make sure that we have that strong connectivity, that we're working on projects together. And in addition to that, we go around the world together. We just came back from Japan for the Midwest U.S. Japan Association Conference in Tokyo and in Osaka, and we had two of our regional EDOs that came with us. But beyond all of that, we work projects together and we win projects together.
That's great.
One great example of that is we worked in partnership with the Greater Peoria EDC to land Demera, which is an EV bus manufacturer, foreign-owned EV bus manufacturer that we were able to land and announce just earlier this year. So we've had a lot of projects downstate, whether it's VLAND and their $500 million expansion in East Alton, Illinois. Avena Clean Energy, they landed their sustainable aviation fuel plant in East St. Louis. We're seeing a lot of activity all throughout the state, and particularly in central and downstate Illinois, and we're so proud of that work.
Well, that's great. Always so many questions, so little time, but as we wrap, I have to ask, if we're sitting down 5 years from now, what would success look like for you as CEO of the Illinois EDC?
You know, I've been thinking about this question, and one of the things that I think about, and I'm reminded of the work that I did on the Democratic National Convention Host Committee, and I remember being in that space and seeing all of these people come from all around the nation and all around the world visit Chicago, and the impression that they got was just how amazing of a city Chicago is. And I want to take that feeling and apply it to the economic development space. And in particular, I want company decision makers to understand and feel and know that Illinois is the place to scale. Illinois is the place to innovate. Illinois is a place that you will be supported, and when I'm able to ensure that all of those decision makers all throughout the country and all throughout the world see Illinois as a top place to do business, then I'll feel like I've hit my goal. But until then, I'll just be keeping marching towards that.
Well, that's fantastic, Christy. Thank you so much for joining us, and continued success to you and the Illinois EDC.
Thank you, Suzette.
You're very welcome. On the other side of the break, Sufyan, Sohel, and Hugo Balta join Andy at the roundtable. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton, inviting you to tune in for a new episode of Behind the Confident Smile with my guest, Rosie Drumgoole, where we'll discuss what it's like to be a CEO of an impactful Chicago nonprofit and a mother. Tune in on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 or stream online at cantv.org or on the CAN-TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
When you commit to authentic voices, when you trust powerful stories, recognition follows. 2 Emmy nominations, the first in our history. Stream the Emmy-nominated programs now on cantv.org or on the CanTV Plus app. CanTV. Experience the power of community television.
At the roundtable this week, we're taking on 4 stories with long-lasting implications for the region. First, the political landscape in Cook County could be shifting. Board President Toni Preckwinkle, a fixture in Chicago politics for more than 3 decades, is now facing a serious challenge. What does this mean for the balance of power in Cook County government and for voters who've grown accustomed to her steady hand? At City Hall, the debate over Chicago's $1 billion plus 2026 budget deficit is heating up, with fiscal pressures mounting. Progressive and moderate factions on City Council are already butting heads with Mayor Brandon Johnston's administration. The stakes: how to balance public safety, pensions, and neighborhood investment without driving the city deeper into debt. North along the lakefront, Northwestern University is reeling. Its president has resigned amid growing controversy, leaving one of the nation's premier universities searching for stable leadership. What does this mean for the institution's reputation and for higher education in our region? And finally, Chicago Public Schools enrollment continues to decline. With thousands fewer students in classrooms, CPS faces tough questions: how to right-size the district, support neighborhood schools, and avoid deep cuts that could impact the city's most vulnerable families. Joining me now to break it all down are roundtable regulars Sufyan Sohel, chair of the Cook County Commission on Human Rights, and the Fulcrum's executive editor, Hugo Balta. Sufyan, Hugo, thank you for coming back again, and welcome.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start with Toni Preckwinkle. What's going on? I at first thought it wasn't going to be that big a deal, and then I looked at the money. You know, he's got, Alderman Riley's got quite a bit of money, and a little bit more than her. What do you think, Hugo?
She leads the Democratic Party. She's a power unto herself. Very difficult to unseat her. Yes, I agree. It's time for change. You said more than 3 decades, and I think, I believe in term limits, and I believe there should be a sort of round robin of leadership to really help us move forward. But I think Preckwinkle will step down when Preckwinkle wants to step down. Unseating her is not going to happen, and it's certainly not going to happen in the short term.
Sufyan, you concur?
I concur wholeheartedly, but it shows that voters want to change, and I think we are ready for change. Chicago, Illinois has this notion of being political machines, and I think people are getting tired of it, seeing what's happening globally, nationally, locally. People are just exhausted, and they're ready for new leadership.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, keep in mind, not all her time in government's been at Cook County, right? She spent a significant amount of time as a distinguished alderman, or alderperson. But I think 2 things. One, on the one hand, I think people are kind of generally ready for change. They're anxious to see new leadership. They want to hear. So that would kind of go towards Alderman Riley. He'll be new at Cook County, but he's been in the city council for a heartbeat as well. Do you think that matters?
Sure, experience does matter. Yeah. I think that will work in his favor. I think right now, you mentioned money is going to be an issue. Preckwinkle has shown she could raise money, and I think that will, in the end, also help in her performance as well. So it's many different factors. If we go at face value, leadership experience, new ideas, yes, he's in the running. But when you talk about leading the Democratic Party, her ability to outperform in raising money, very tough road ahead for him.
Yeah, the other thing, and Sufyan, you know this because the county's a big county. He's an alderman in the city, and he has been for a long time. And while that's good, there's a lot more to Cook County than the city of Chicago. And I think that could be a hindrance for him. I don't know how well known he is outside of the city of Chicago.
I mean, she definitely has a name recognition. People know her for her years of service. But like as you said, it's going to give an opportunity to bring in more of these modern and reform voices, but at the same time, weaken, I think, the democratic structure that we have in place, and at a time that we may not want it to weaken.
Yeah.
And I also think her response was, she's doing the job, right? She's fighting the Trump administration on behalf of the people of Cook County. And that's a strong position, right? This isn't a leader that's already leaning back. She's very much leaning forward, and that in itself, I think, makes her a strong candidate.
Yeah, I also like the fact that at least her first response wasn't a critique of him, right? Right? You're like, thank you for not going directly to negative politics.
She doesn't need to.
She doesn't need to, is right, and but sometimes that doesn't really matter, especially in today's environment. So let's move on. Speaking of hostile politics, let's talk about the budget debate at City Council. So, we're going to have over a $1 billion shortfall. He's got lots of great minds working on it. Ernst & Young and his panel. What do you think? We're going to see some ideas coming?
Look, first of all, kudos for bringing these thought leaders together. I think that was already a win. Lots of ideas, nearly 100 of them. How many of these 100 ideas are Band-Aids, and how many of these ideas are really going to get us closer to a budget? Well, there's much more left to be seen, so I'm skeptical. The other thing is, we keep doing the same mistake over and over again. We're just thinking about next year, what's in front of us. That's important. But until we start to think about 3 to 5 years ahead, we're really going to be chasing our tails over and over again, and that's part of the problem. Just don't give me just ideas that are Band-Aids that are going to make some chip away at the right now. Talk to me about bigger ideas that talk about strategy in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, you concur with that?
Yes.
It doesn't work when we concur. I mean, come on.
But that being said,
I was hoping for some hostility, but it didn't happen.
No. But, we're looking at confidence among city people and what damage that's going to be. What are the potential city services that are going to be cut? And at the end, it's going to show what the city values in terms of priorities of what it keeps, what it gets rid of, what it cuts down on, and I think the people are going to be watching more so than they already are watching.
Yeah.
And then also, arguably, when you bring in outside experts, you need to also make sure you're building consensus with your own administration around these experts, or are you ignoring them for these experts? And I'm curious to see how he balances that moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm going to come back to, I want to talk about how he manages the city council, but I do want to talk about the idea that what you hope comes out of these two reports is some new ideas, but also some transparency on, look, we probably need to cut our spending, right? So some ideas on how you do that, because we do have some structural things like pensions and stuff, and he's been challenged on his unwillingness to make cuts. Do you think we'll see that? Some recommendations on that?
I hope so.
Some cover.
When we had this conversation last year, it was about transparency, and the 11th hour of saying, I'm not going to touch property taxes. I'm not going to touch property taxes, and the 11th hour, I have to. Listen, it didn't work the first time. It hurt you politically. This time around, learn from it, be transparent, everybody's an adult, and let's get to it before the 11th hour. That's going to be key.
Yeah, plus, I think if he would just say, look, I have to cut this, this, and this, but I really don't want to cut this, this, and this, and in order not to do that, I'm going to need to raise property taxes, I think would help. But you also need to see some sacrifice, do you think?
Agreed, and I feel he's not coming out in front of it enough vocally. Yeah. And it's always seems to be an afterthought of how to walk back some of his actions and comments.
Yeah. So, and then the last piece is just, how do you manage a city council, a good hunk of whom don't seem to be practically realistic about how to manage a budget or city government?
I think you have to bring them on board early in the conversation and get them involved in not only understanding what the numbers are, but why things have to change and shift and what needs to be cut and why that's important for the overall picture. I mean, everyone has their own interests and represent different interests, but when you don't get that buy-in early on, and I think he may be too far into his tenure now to get that buy-in, but it's better late than never.
Yeah. Well, we shall see. So let's go north. Well, before we go north, let's talk about CPS just in case, because we're going to stay in the city for a hot minute. So, and this is a topic near and dear to my heart, as you know. So, for those of us who've been paying attention to CPS, the enrollment is significantly declined. Like, everybody's been predicting that for like a really long time. That's my favorite part about the story. People are like, oh my God, enrollment's down. I'm like, yes, hello. They've been telling you that forever. So the bigger question is, how do we, is it time now to have a serious conversation about downsizing the district?
I think so. I think that, to your point, this is sort of like a tsunami that we knew was coming at us. So no one should feel, oh my God, deers in a headlight. And it says a lot about the state of the city itself. There's an exodus, beginning with the Black community, moving out of the city of Chicago because it's unaffordable. And with it, their families. That's what part of the reasons we've seen a decrease in CPS. And now we're under a cloud of fear from the Trump administration with the immigrant community. And that's also affecting enrollment with this community either leaving Chicago because of gentrification, places like Little Village and Pilsen, but also keeping their children at home, homeschooling because of fear of immigration. So there's this whirlwind, these perfect storms that are really coming at CPS. If we should have been talking about change a year ago, not now, but it's here now. And if we don't talk about it now and plan ahead, it's going to be much more destructive in 2026 to 2027 and beyond that.
Right, and I think you're right. I mean, there are definitely some factors that are making it worse, but the demographics they've been predicting a decline. They're doing it in higher education and lower. I mean, we just started having a lot less babies, and now they're coming into school or not. But we have a rule that says you can't close schools, but that then leads to crazy in town. In one of the articles, they highlighted Douglas High School has 30 students in it. How can that possibly be good for those students?
And the schools' costs aren't going down, so how do you afford to keep all of these schools open and operate at the same level? And that's what causes more people to move out. Right. And, and I see that a lot, and not only with the gentrification, but with the guaranteed you move to the suburbs, what schools you're going to be going into. And, I'm a big proponent of let's stay and invest in the schools now and build them to what we want them to be, but not everyone sees it that way.
Well, but let's have a rational conversation about which schools, right? If you imagine if you had a rational conversation about truly downsizing, how you make that work in a rational environment, and it's very emotional, so I should take that back, and that just happens because schools are personal. I get that, but let's just face it, we need to come together and figure out a way to do that for the students. That's the other thing. As usual, in these conversations, people forget about the kids. They're all like, wow, I can't close my school. School's got 10 kids in it. So, you think, are we capable of doing this?
No, of course not. Because every decision that's made is political, right? And it's always about what's in the best interest for me and not for we. Right. And we can't get past that. Yeah. That's part of the problem as well. We're not looking at solutions that look to compromise and collaborate. It's my way and us against the world. And that just doesn't work.
Well, if we prioritize the stakeholders first in so many issues, we'd live in a much better community.
Yeah, if we would just come together and just talk. And also kind of accept realities, right? That your school with 100 people will do much better if we can figure out a way to combine it with another school with 100 or 200 and then make a much better performing school of 250. Agreed. Right?
But also investing in our communities, right? Because which are the schools that are going to be earmarked to close? Right. They're usually in neighborhoods that have historic disinvestment. Yes. It's a symbiotic relationship. Right. So I wouldn't want to have a conversation that said, well, you've got 10 students. Well, wait a minute. Let's talk talk about the neighborhood as well, because it's hand in hand. There's a reason for this exodus. There's a reason why there are 10 students. And if you start to pick that way, then we're going to continue to make the same mistakes that have put the West and South Side primarily in the situation that exists now. We got to stop that.
I totally agree, but I also think you can do that with having a conversation around equal investment, right? And an investment that says, when we're done, you're going to have a better quality. The objective is a better performing school that your students deserve, right?
And I think historically you failed to do that.
Right. It's hard.
Yeah.
We're not good at it. It's not our core competency. Unfortunately, as usual, we've run out of time, and we're not going to get to talk about the president of Northwestern, who I personally think was doomed when he fired Pat Fitzgerald or Fitzpatrick or whatever the coach's name was. So, but he's had a lot of challenges. So maybe next week we'll talk about it. Next time we'll talk about if something else doesn't happen. First, thank you so much. For both of you for being here. As usual, it was a robust and enjoyable conversation. On the other side of a short break, political analyst Kimberly Agowan joins me to discuss seismic shifts in local political fortunes and what it means now and could mean over the next few election cycles. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Darrious Hilmon.
And I'm Gregory Smith.
On the next Petty and Profound, we're diving into the hidden fee epidemic that's taking over everything from restaurants to ride shares.
And we'll break down how buying anything became a guessing game where you always lose.
Tune in Wednesday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV, cable channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app.
Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
CAN TV is the lens through which Chicago's stories are told, harnessing the unifying power of community television. With CAN TV On Demand, immerse yourself in the richness of our city through exclusive stories and programs tailored just for you, connecting you to the heartbeats of our streets, the voices of our people, and the spirit that makes Chicago unique. Discover the strength of your community on CAN TV On Demand.
There's a saying in politics, if you really want to see where power is shifting, don't just look to Washington, look at what's happening at home. Last week, Chicago politics delivered one of those seismic shifts after 24 years as Chief Judge. Timothy Evans, a towering figure in Cook County courts and City Hall politics, lost his grip on the gavel. In an internal vote among his colleagues, Evans was ousted, ending a run that spanned nearly a quarter of a century. His successor, Judge Charles Beach, may be less familiar to the public, but the real intrigue came from Judge Nicole Patton, whose 14 votes and one critical phone call that never happened may have been the difference between Evans securing one final term or being forced out. At the same time, history seems to be rhyming elsewhere. Evans once lost his aldermanic seat to Toni Preckwinkle, and now, decades later, Preckwinkle herself faces a serious challenger in downtown alderman Brendan Riley. In a political climate reshaped by the close state's attorney's race, that challenge can't be dismissed. So what does all this mean for succession planning, alliances, and the way political power really shifts in Chicago? Joining me to unpack it all is political analyst Kimberly Agowan. Kimberly, welcome to the newsroom.
It's so nice to be with you today.
Nice to see you. Welcome. So let's talk. So what had happened?
What had happened? Well, which one do you want to start with?
Let's talk about Judge Evans.
It's so interesting that Judge Evans, of course, we all know him as the former, many years ago, 4th Ward alderman, who served multiple terms as alderman and then also ran for mayor. Right. And that was at a time at which we had him running, we had the sitting mayor, Sawyer, Eugene Sawyer, who was 6th Ward Alderman, as well as Richard Daley. And that ushered in 20 years of Richard Daley. But what happened after that, of course, is that he became, years later, the chief judge of Cook County, one of the largest court systems in the United States. He has been there, as you mentioned, for almost 25 years. And recently he was challenged. He's been challenged before, but in this instance, it's just really interesting that he was challenged by one judge, Charles Beach, who used to be a defense attorney for years, and also Judge Nicole Patton, who serves as the president of the Chicago Bar Association. But when you look at the way it all lined up, I mean, we're in Chicago after all, we're in Cook County, so, you know, sometimes elections are not as they seem. Judge Patton came in and actually only garnered about 14 votes. So it makes one wonder, was she there to really run, or was she there to make sure that another person came in? And it just, sometimes when I'm looking at these types of situations, I just wonder, could a call have been made? Could there have been a discussion about, you know, hey, I'm chief judge. I know I see you as the future of the party, future of, you know, being a judge, chief judge. Let's work together. Let me do this one more term, and then, you know, turn it over. This is something that I see that you can do, because honestly, if you only get 14 votes, I'm not sure that you really had much of a chance in the first place. But now we've got a brand new chief judge, and he will oversee the assignments for the judges in all of the courts. And we know that there is a huge backlog of cases. This is something that has to be dealt with as well. It's just, it really is a major changing of the guard.
And I think just for my viewers who may not understand the significance of the chief judge role and the fact that Judge Evans has been there for a long time. So first of all, you know, he has been there for a long time, and the role is elected by the other sitting
only by
judges.
The other judges.
By the other judges, and typically someone who's been there for that long has the relationships, and you would anticipate not any typical serious challengers. So clearly there was, you know, Judge Beach had to have been able to develop a base and some support, so it was a surprise, I think, externally. Do you think? I know you practice in the circuit court. Do you think it was a surprise to people who are there on a regular basis?
You know, I think, I don't know, I think yes, because there still was an appetite for him to continue as chief judge. He was very close in the number of votes. This was not by any means a landslide. And so he still had a lot of support. He obviously has a lot of respect, but it makes me wonder, what type of succession planning do we have with these kinds of positions, where someone would rather kind of stop you from being the chief judge and create a position for someone else, instead of being a part of that alliance and assisting with you continuing and then bowing out gracefully. We don't seem to have a lot of graceful bow outs in politics in Chicago or in Cook County.
I think that's a great, really a great point. So speaking of potential, you know, upheavals, let's talk a little bit about President Preckwinkle's race. We talked about it earlier on the roundtable. So what do you think?
I think that she is a formidable politician. I think that, you know, she, as a matter of, you mentioned the connection, she is the person who did oust Tim Evans after she ran 3 times, and the 3rd time was a charm. She was able to win that seat and served for multiple terms until she decided she wanted to be the Cook County Board President, where she won very convincingly and has been in office for several terms very convincingly, in some cases having no competitors at all. But right now, she is being challenged by Alderman Brendan Riley of the 42nd Ward, downtown, you know, central Chicago area ward. And I'm wondering, and I'm thinking, when you see someone decide they're going to take that challenge, and they're going to make that challenge against someone who is so powerful and so strong, you just wonder what alliances he's made. What makes him think that he would be able to run against her in that way? It's one of those races. You know, a lot of people don't know what the Cook County Board does. They don't know the amount of money. They're in charge of a major budget. They're in charge of a lot of the hospital, all of the health care,
the
safety
forest
nets,
preserves.
The forest preserves. There are many different aspects. She's not directly in charge of the sheriffs, but she is over these budgets. So she makes sure that the money goes where it's supposed to go, et cetera. So it's so interesting that someone is deciding to challenge her. Now, they did have their slating session a couple of months ago, and there was no challenge acknowledged at that time. But now, for Brendan Riley just a couple of weeks to come out and say, I'm going to put my hat in and I'm going to go for this seat, is very interesting. Now, I'm also looking back to the Cook County State's Attorney race that took place last year. As you know, Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx, who was handpicked, groomed for the position by the board president, Preckwinkle, decided to forego another term. Lots of issues, she brought in a lot of reform, but then there were also other issues as well. Jussie Smollett, those types of things that would not die. So she decided to not run. And of course, you have Eileen O'Neill Burke, who decided to run against another person who was supported by Toni Preckwinkle, Clayton Harris. And although it was a very close race, the fact remains that the Cook County Board President's choice did not win. And I think that when you're in these very intense political positions, those types of losses, quite honestly, the blood was in the water.
Although I think a couple of things. I think you're totally right, but I do think coattails these days, in general, aren't as long as they used to be, right? And I think she is a formidable candidate and leader.
Very much so.
People to oust an incumbent, people have to have a reason, right? Remember, the last time she had any real, significant political issues, if you remember, was the soda tax. Remember
the pop
soda
tax,
right? Which everybody hated, but right now that's not what's happening. And as she herself said, in response to his announcement, I'm doing things on behalf of the county. So I think that's a real barrier for him. And I think she also has, as you point out, she's the chair of the Cook County Democratic Party, which means she has a lot of relationships in the party around the county.
That's true. The only thing that I would say is that the one outstanding figure that is in so many people's minds right now, which is the great divider, is pre-George Floyd, post-George Floyd. And when I say that, I mean the amount of crime that has taken place that you are seeing in every neighborhood. Now, there were certain communities who had to live through that before George Floyd. Not much was made of it. It was contained to the south and west side, and everyone seemed to be okay as long as it didn't spill into the downtown area, the Gold Coast, et cetera. But you're seeing it absolutely everywhere, at least not killings necessarily, but you're seeing those types of crimes everywhere.
Which matter to people.
And when you are sitting in the seat, you have to wear the jacket for it, whether or not it's your fault. And I think that considering Brendan Riley is now the alderman of that area, he's probably listening to those constituents saying, we need a change. Because if you were looking at social media, so many people were talking about crime, et cetera, that had never talked about it before because they weren't impacted. That may be where he's going to hang his hat.
Well, and that has been and will continue to be an issue. And I look forward to having continuing conversations about this race and other topics with you in the future. Thank you so much for joining me on the Newsroom. It's really nice to see you again.
Thank you.
On the other side of the break, Suzette talks about emotional intelligence with leading executive coach Guy Summers. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton, inviting you to tune in for a new episode of Behind the Confident Smile with my guest, Rosie Drumgoole, where we'll discuss what it's like to be a CEO of an impactful Chicago nonprofit and a mother. Tune in on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 or stream online at cantv.org or on the CAN-TV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
Every community has a story, a pulse, a voice waiting to be heard. At CAN-TV, we bring these stories to life, from the heart of Chicago to your living room. Join us in supporting hyper-local television. Your backing helps us cover what matters directly in our communities, unfiltered and upfront. Help tell the important stories of our communities. Become a program underwriter today.
In recent years, we've heard a lot about the importance of emotional intelligence, or EQ, especially in the workplace. But what does that really mean? Unlike IQ, which measures intellectual ability, emotional intelligence is about how we understand and manage our own emotions and how we recognize and respond to the emotions of others. It's the ability to navigate conflict, lead with empathy, communicate effectively, and build trust. In fact, research shows that people with high emotional intelligence are often better at teamwork, more effective in leadership roles, and even more resilient in high-stress environments. Some experts argue that EQ can matter just as much, if not more, than technical skills when it comes to workplace success. To help us understand what emotional intelligence is, why it matters, and how organizations can foster it, we're joined by one of the area's leading executive coaches, the president of the Farrell Group, Guy Summers. Guy, welcome back to the Newsroom.
Thank you very much, Suzette.
It's a pleasure to talk to you today. So, let's start with the basics. Tell us, what exactly is emotional intelligence and how does it differ from traditional intelligence, or IQ?
Sure. Well, I thought your definition at the outset was fantastic. It really is about understanding our emotions and then managing our emotions. Also being able to pick up where other people are and our ability to then modify and move and adjust based on how we read them. The other thing I'd say is it is a lot of items. So it's not one or two things. It's probably 24, 25, 30 different kinds of competencies that we are working with.
Sure. So why is emotional intelligence such a critical skill in today's workplace? And is there any variability across industries?
In general, it's shown, and studies have shown, that the better and the stronger your emotional intelligence is, regardless of the work that you do, regardless of the level that you're at, it will result in you being a higher performer and being more successful. So the number one thing is, at any level, doing anything, it's good. But as you go higher into organizations, it turns out that emotional intelligence is the thing that actually starts to distinguish you among your peers, and it's required more as you go up. And if you choose to be a leader or you want to rise in an organization, then your ability to get better and to adapt these skills is important.
That's really interesting. Can you perhaps give us an example of how high emotional intelligence, or perhaps even the lack of it, can affect team performance or workplace culture or even conflict resolution?
Yeah, conflict resolution, I always like to stay away from that. But I think a lot of it, if you think of the most difficult domain, so there's one part of emotional intelligence that's really about the inside. So it's where am I of myself, and then what can I do to manage myself? And then there's the outside part that's sort of, how about in my relationships, how am I doing there, and how am I not doing well there? So I think one big area is empathy. And so over the years, it's been shown that leaders with higher empathetic capabilities tend to do better. That's one area that I would focus on if I were saying, how could I get better at emotional intelligence? Sure. That's a big driver.
Well, staying with this topic of leadership, what does emotional intelligence really look like in practice when one is in leadership or aspiring to leadership?
Well, there's many ways to look at it. I think when you think of the greatest leaders that you've ever encountered or that you could think of, there are certain things that those leaders do that actually would fall under the domain of emotional intelligence. One thing, for instance, is they manage to inspire you and to motivate you. So, and that's, I would tell you, is a very high level of emotional intelligence. So there are things related to how I manage myself and how aware I am of myself and how I manage a relationship. But that ability to actually motivate, inspire, and move people like the greatest leaders do is an example of someone that has super high emotional intelligence.
Okay. Well, would you say that emotional intelligence is something that people are born with, or can it be learned? Can one go through a training to obtain emotional intelligence?
Yeah, that's one thing that's a little different from the intellectual quotient that you talked about, the IQ and the emotional intelligence. So it's actually possible to move your IQ, but it's difficult and it takes a lot of work. Improving your emotional intelligence, though, is something actually you can do also with work, but not as much work, a lot more focus, but it's something that, like all of our intelligences. So, and these aren't the only two. So if you think of it, there are people that have physical intelligences, they have musical intelligences. So there's a broad realm of intelligences, but this is one that you actually can improve upon. And to answer your question even one step further, yes, we're born with talents, and some people are better at this than others are.
So since we can improve upon it, do you have a couple of examples you can give us in terms of, some practical ways that we can build it?
Yeah, I think I would start with awareness. So that's sort of the cornerstone. And if you think about it, it's like, how can I be more self-aware? And there are ways that you can become more self-aware. And we think of awareness as like, Suzette, I know me, I know how I am, I know what I do, right? But that's actually kind of internal self-awareness. It turns out there's an external self-awareness. So people that know you may actually view you differently than the way you view yourself and the way you hit them. So what kinds of things could you do? Maybe you could just send a note to some trusted colleagues and say, could you tell me the 4 or 5 things that I do really well? Maybe you ask them a series of questions, or in the world of business, that might be a 360 that would go out to several people. But if you asked 5 or 6 people what they thought of you and gave them specific questions, and you looked at that feedback, you'd find that now your external self-awareness is going to be a lot higher. You're going to be able to identify themes, things you hadn't thought about yourself. You're thinking you're one way, but in fact, you're different. And actually, there's a major study that's been published that says only about 15% of people are actually really good at both of those things.
Interesting. So perhaps what not to do is not to fire off that loaded email. Maybe read it or take a break and calm down a little bit before you...
Firing off that loaded email is tough. And even in today's world, I think something that's becoming more of a factor is just things like artificial intelligence. So where you're having a computer and a device develop a product for you, and that ability to read this and say, okay, it's going to this group of people or to this individual. How do I modify this? What nuance exists there? And your ability to then look at that document, to modify that document, given the audience, what you're trying to accomplish, all of those things incorporate emotional intelligence.
Can you point to any challenges that you see most commonly people facing when they're trying to improve their emotional intelligence?
There's a lot there, so it depends. I think the most complex areas are with relationships. And if you think of it, yes, I can manage myself. I can get better at time management. There are things I can do. But when you have other people involved, like the conflict you mentioned, that's tough. And often it's things like that. It's different personalities trying to mesh to move forward within an organization to get something accomplished. So I would say a common thing relates to relationships, and much of my work is working with people on how they can get along better with others, how they can motivate others, how can they get higher production out of individuals that they're working with, and things like that.
Okay. Well, as workplaces become more diverse, global, and fast-paced, how do you see emotional intelligence really shaping the future of work?
Yeah, I think it's going to shape the future in many ways. One thing that's come out recently is a big study that's done annually by Gallup, and it's the global state of the workplace. The most recent study indicated that employee engagement has fallen significantly. In fact, for the second time in the last 12 years, it fell even further than it did during COVID and the lockdown period. So now we've got a lot of people that are at work. Only about 20% of people are engaged at work, which means 1 out of 5, the other 4 out of 5 aren't. So this is an opportunity for the application of emotional intelligence in terms of what kinds of things can you do, especially as a leader, because it turns out in the study, the big gap has been leader engagement has fallen. When leader engagement falls, team engagement falls. When team engagement falls, the organization is less productive.
Wow, very informative. This has really been an intriguing conversation, guys. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you for bringing information that our viewers can use and tools that they can use in their everyday lives. We appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
On the other side of the break, CAN TV's executive director, Darrious Hilmon, delivers commentary about the killing of Charlie Kirk and the dangers of martyrdom. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Darrious Hilmon.
And I'm Gregory Smith.
On the next Petty and Profound, we're diving into the hidden fee epidemic that's taking over everything from restaurants to ride shares.
And we'll break down how buying anything became a guessing game where you always lose.
Tune in Wednesday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV, cable channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app.
Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
When you commit to authentic voices, when you trust powerful stories, recognition follows. 2 Emmy nominations, the first in our history. Stream the Emmy-nominated programs now on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. CAN TV. Experience the power of community television.
Back this week with a special commentary, CAN TV Executive Director Darrious Hilmon. Darrious?
In the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder, there's a question we must wrestle with. What story do we tell about his death? There's a difference between martyrdom narrative and martyrdom syndrome. One is about remembering, honoring, and learning. The other is about myth-making that fuels harm. The martyrdom narrative can give meaning to loss. It allows families, communities, even nations to look at tragedy and draw lessons that help prevent the next one. It insists on a life mattering and that the circumstances of that loss should not be repeated. It uses memory as a tool for justice and healing. But martyrdom syndrome is different. It's when we take tragedy and weaponize it, when grief is twisted into grievance and a person becomes less human and more symbol. When their name is invoked not to heal, but to harden, not to reconcile, but to radicalize. In that space, words become daggers, cutting deeper divides, calling for vengeance instead of peace, creating copycats instead of change. That's the double-edged sword of words. They can sanctify or they can vilify. They can create clarity or they can fuel chaos. And in an age where language travels instantly and endlessly on our screens, through our feeds, across our conversations, the danger of martyrdom syndrome is very real. So as we process the murder of Charlie Kirk, we must ask, will we allow his story to be hijacked by anger, fear, or opportunism? Or will we hold fast to the narrative that honors him as a human being, insists on accountability, and calls for a future where fewer lives are lost in violence? The choice really is ours. If we let martyrdom syndrome take hold, the cycle of violence and dehumanization continues. But if we choose the martyrdom narrative, one rooted in dignity, truth, and healing, then Kirk's life and his death will not be in vain. In the end, the way we speak about loss will shape the way we live after it. Oh, and one other thing while I have you. Let's normalize not expecting Black folks to be sympathetic to those who hate us aggressively.
Thank you, Darrious. That's our time for this week. Thank you to all of our guests and to you, Chicago, for making CAN TV a part of your day.
CAN TV's Chief Education Correspondent, Adrian Segura, returns next week to host a special education-focused edition of Chicago Newsroom 2.0, with guests including State Representative Curtis Tarver and CPS board members Ed Bannon, Che Rhymefest, and Angel Gutierrez.
I'll return in 2 weeks for a live edition of the Newsroom featuring an extended one-on-one conversation with U.S. Congresswoman and Senate candidate Robin Kelly. Until then, be well and well informed.